I do believe that this opportunity also presents a historic challenge to us. Parliament is the ultimate law-making authority on this issue as far as India is concerned. Movements outside the Parliament are all intended to convey public opinion and the intensity of that public opinion to us. And that message, which is coming to all of us from different parts of the country today, could not be louder and clearer. And the loud and clear message today is that the country is expecting the Parliament to perform its historic obligation and duty, its commitment to the people, and take effective steps so that we are able to substantially tackle the problem of corruption, if not eliminate it altogether in India. So while we do so, we must also have the honesty of purpose to really analyze where we have gone wrong. And when I say where we have gone wrong, I don't want to sound partisan. Where is the activity, both political and economic, as far as this country is concerned? Which are the challenges which are presented before us? Today, sir, there is a serious crisis of credibility. There is an erosion as far as the credibility of governance in some places is concerned. People are losing faith that the normal mechanisms which we have put in place will be adequate and sufficient to tackle the menace of corruption. Therefore, it is extremely important that we introspect honestly and introspect seriously. Our introspection must lead us to accept what is truthfully the situation on the ground. We should intend to restore the credibility of governance, raise the bar of accountability, and provide for deterrence so that those who indulge in these unacceptable activities, whether they are in the bureaucracy or they are in public life or they are in any other sphere of governance, do not get away after committing such heinous crimes against the society. So I had originally thought, when I was initially learning my initial lessons in politics, that there are too many controls and regulations which the government had. And we thought when liberalization sets in and we have delicensing taking place, freedom from controls taking place, the role of government and the intrusion of government into various areas will come to an end or will substantially decline. And once that happens, you'll probably have a much cleaner society as far as corruption is concerned. Sir, I must confess that this was an honest belief that even I shared. Of course, this had its own advantages. Delicensing meant, freedom from controls meant that people wanting to undertake economic activity did not have to move around in the corridors of power. To that extent, we took a step forward. But as we progressed, sir, we saw that when we unleashed these larger avenues of economic activity, we suddenly found that new areas and much bigger areas as far as corruption and graft are concerned suddenly started emerging. They got decentralized. And let's take, and I intend to place before the House, and I shall endeavor at least in that part of what I wish to say to be as non-partisan as possible, though there are some observations I have to make about the present government a little later. Let us look at what has happened across the country. Today, if we look around, irrespective of which party governs which part of India, land itself has become one major area of corruption. For any economic activity, be it housing, be it industry, be it institutional user, people need land. Therefore, acquisition of land, which is the land intended to be acquired, which is the land intended to be released from acquisition, which is the land whose alignment of some highway or road must be changed so that some land comes on the main highway itself, that increases the value of land, the conversion of land user, the clearance of layout plans for townships. Now, all this from top to bottom. And we have now gone to the extent of saying that if you have an urban project which is more than 50 crores, and land being very costly, most projects would be more than 50 crores, it will also require an environmental clearance from the central government. At least there was one stage some years ago, not recently, where literally thousands of files used to be pending with the central government because that environmental clearance is to be required because one building in some part of the country has to be constructed. So at different levels, the kind of discretions we brought in, we suddenly found that all these activities became almost a handmaiden for various kinds of discretions. And since a large amount of money was involved in this, these became central areas for corruption. Mining. Now let us look at the kind of system we have. Originally, we never thought that there would be an ability to make money if you go underground or if you go underwater into the sea for oil and gas, underground for mining, or even if you go into the space as far as spectrum is concerned. Now, as we have progressed, we have suddenly found that these areas, to those who had wicked intentions, provided a great opportunity. In mining, sir, except for a mere amount of royalty and some taxes, the state gets almost next to nothing. And there is a transfer of natural wealth into private hands. You want to be partisan? I'll come to that.
No, please.
And suddenly we found a situation that not only is it a transfer of huge amount of wealth into private hands, our policy, sir, and I've said this in this house earlier, first come, first serve, first application, these were all intended to benefit not actual users but those who could trade in them. Some states now have altered that policy and want only licenses to be given to those who will actually create jobs and value addition in those areas. There's a serious case for rethinking that whole policy and how much those people pay, how much is the revenue, and I'm told the mining law amendment is also being proposed, whereby some amount of money to be realized is to be spent for the development of the local region itself. But over the years, that was the second area which became. I refer to the third area, and these were all areas which we had not even conceived of 20 years ago, where we found that even through airwaves, and what was spectrum ultimately? It was a scarce resource, it was a limited resource, and therefore, by following a policy in which you say, I want to give it to the actual user has deep pockets, he could afford to pay more, but on some proposal or the other, we had a discretionary policy, we decided to underprice it, and therefore by underpricing it, we realized that there were people who were ready to make money out of them. Oil and gas. These were again areas where people went underwater, under the sea, and you found huge amounts of revenues again, and these are all national assets. And therefore, in order to get these national assets, who are the people who will get them? Whether it's spectrum, it's these assets, or it's mining, or for that matter, any other kind of largesse that the state gave. So the state, on behalf of the people, was holding these largesse, ports and highways. So in each contract, the terms can be so drafted so that while drafting the terms of the tender, you originally know who the eventual successful party is going to be. Now, these are all areas where we realize that we have started seriously compromising. So we also have reached a stage, and I must clarify, I am not an opponent of that whole idea of the society, the private sector, the non-governmental organizations, charitable trusts, getting into the field of education, from school education to higher education. Some of them have made a commendable contribution. But then in areas where there was a scarcity created in terms of seats, and we know the states where this is happening, unthinkable amounts as capitation fee for a single undergraduate or postgraduate medical seat, because we've decided to create scarcity of seats. Wherever the scarcity got over, the capitation fees disappeared. But wherever we created scarcities, so we found this became a major area as far as black money is concerned. Liquor, the way the tenders are given in some of the states, the way they are concentrated in limited hands. So these are all areas where we found that the extent of economic activity and its expansion, the average person found that it was beyond his reach, and we led to a concentration of wealth in certain hands who could then run and administer the whole system. As far as the average citizen is concerned, let us look at what's the plight of our revenue departments. Custom, excise, taxes, municipal taxes. Whoever has to go to these authorities, and when we hear people on television these days amongst the protesters, it is these grievances which has compelled them all to come out and say, well, we've ultimately found a voice and therefore we must speak out as far as these issues are concerned. Municipalities, rationing, licensing, transport departments of various governments. These are all areas where we suddenly found over the years it had become an accepted norm that a corrupt practice would prevail, and without a citizen going through that route, it was very difficult to get his papers or his file or his work to be done, or his papers to move. So this not only has had an impact as far as governance is concerned, let us look at what's happened to other limbs of the state. We've last week only discussed the judicial institution in the case of the resolution for removal of one of the honorable judges. I don't want to repeat that. But the fact of the matter is, lower judiciary owes its accountability to the higher judiciary. The higher you go, the accountability norms get weakened. And therefore, when they get weakened, that this is one area where people can get away, and therefore the accountability norms are not there. I said it last week and I have no hesitation in repeating it today, sir. I've been a close observer of that institution for the last 34 years. What was unthinkable when I joined the bar, I find a large number of rumors almost every time you happen to visit somebody who's actively concerned with the institution. Media. The whole concept and the idea of giving a free media was freedom from control, freedom from any kind of state regulation, and we are proud of an independent media to that effect. But then in the last few years, we've started getting whispers, and then a number of us had to face the reality. The whole menace of paid news. Media, in fact, has one greater function to perform. Media has one greater function to perform. Industry may only help in developing the economy. Media shapes the human mind. And the shaping of the human mind also gets polluted because you have to buy packages, the reader is then misled. The right to be informed, the right to knowledge, as far as the reader is concerned or the viewer is concerned, gets vitiated because of the media packages. And therefore, I think for each one of us, we created specialized investigative agencies. We created specialized investigative agencies. Sir, we created specialized investigative agencies hoping that whenever corruption takes place in any sphere of life, these agencies will then step in and will start cleansing up the system. One such agency, sir, which was created, because we had a problem. Why was the CBI created? The CBI was created under the Delhi Special Police Establishment Act because law and order in our constitution is a state subject. But the central government has its establishments all over the country. Now, obviously, a state government can't investigate, a state police can't investigate what goes on in the central government. Therefore, the central government said, I must have my own police to investigate cases of corruption. With the consent of the state, it can also investigate cases, what happens in the states. But the state has to consent because we have a federal polity. We suddenly found that the investigative agencies and the premier investigative agency that we created suddenly started functioning for collateral or political reasons. And I can give you umpteen cases. I don't want to get into these cases. Let me give you one or two illustrations. Our friends from both principal parties of Uttar Pradesh are here. How many times has the CBI changed affidavits in the cases of their leaders? Depending on the intensity of their political opposition to the government in power, the color of the affidavit changes accordingly. Sir, in Andhra Pradesh, I recollect that the earlier former chief minister, unfortunately no more in this world, when he had a battle going on with the leading media organization of the state, you had investigative agencies unleashed against that media organization. And suddenly when the honorable chief minister is no more, and his family members have gone and formed a separate political party, you find the CBI being unleashed against his political party, so the dead man is retrospectively added as an accused. Sir, at a time when...
Please, baithe. Hanumantrao ji, baithe.
Sir,
the honourable leader of the opposition has been referring to about the former honourable chief minister of Andhra Pradesh. Sir, there was a case filed, the petition filed before the High Court of High Court of Andhra Pradesh. The court ordered CBI inquiry. On the directions of the court order, the case is being investigated, and the name which has been referring to honourable former chief minister, because the allegations that have been made in the petition has been mentioned. Because of that only the name of the former chief minister has been mentioned. This is on the court direction. The investigation is going on.
No, please.
I will tell you, sir.
No, that is not it. It is today, yes. Please, Mr. Punji, please sit down.
Sir,
Mr. Hanumantrao, no, please.
I am conscious of the fact what Mr. Narayan Swamy says is factually correct. But let me remind him, any institution, be it investigation, be it the courts, their credibility is also judged when they are not carried away with the times. So when the late chief minister was alive and people were petitioning courts, if the court had passed that order, it was a different matter. Today the political situation changes. I don't want to add anything more to this, but these are not because this relates to an individual case, but it only is a serious and a sad reflection on the health of some of our institutions. And because the health of our institutions is this, let us then not blame people who have come onto the roads in the present environment and who are now saying please reform this system, and they are all looking at us. What are we going to do under these circumstances? So while I'm at this, I'll just touch the last point and then go to the larger submission which I have to make. Is it not factually true that even 64 years after independence, despite various honest efforts made by government, and here I am not only blaming political parties, we have not been able to discover an honest method of political funding in this country. The world's largest democracy has no transparent method of funding its politics. And therefore, discretions in the matter of contracts, land, mining, all these factors, then when they interplay with this, it erodes the credibility of politics and public life. I remember when we were in government, the Congress party had formed a committee headed by the then leader of opposition and today the Honorable Prime Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh. And he prepared a very good report on this subject on behalf of the Congress party. The report was, start giving tax rebates. So whatever people donate, whether individuals donate or firms donate or companies donate to parties, it's a legitimate expenditure. Start giving deductions so that people get some incentivized to make political donations in check. I was then in government, inspired by the report that he prepared. We immediately brought an amendment. It went to a standing committee headed by Mr. Pranab Mukherjee. We amended the Companies Act, we amended the Income Tax Act, and that's the law now for the last 7, 8 years, 8, 9 years. The left parties had opposed it even then. But most others, I remember the left parties had opposed it, but all of us had accepted it in the hope that people will now be incentivized to donate by check because political funding is a reality. Why should it not be transparent? All over the world it is transparent. There is nothing hush-hush about it. We made some beginning, but a small beginning. And therefore we have to seriously consider that if people donate in the hope that the recipient of the donation comes tomorrow in power, and then obviously it will be in my interest to keep him in good humor in anticipation of his coming in power. So we have not been able to invent that system. And therefore that is why people are looking forward to this house, as also the Lok Sabha, that how is Parliament going to react to this particular challenge, sir? I do believe, sir, we must not be mistaken that there are countries all over the world where similar protests took place. In those countries, the protests took place because they were not democracies. They never allowed a protest. They had been strangulated for decades, if not more. In India, we are a free society. People express themselves. And therefore, it would be wrong to compare it. But it is a legitimate aspiration of the people which is now surfacing in the hope that those in decision making will react to it and respond in accordance with the enormity of the problem. Sir, our track record has not been the best. I remember when UPA 1 was formed, there was a great amount of enthusiasm in the government, and one of the issues we regularly raised was people with criminal cases, how do you bring them into government? The issue of tainted ministers. You had cases where people close to those in high places were involved, were collusively killed by the CBI. I am referring to the famous case of Bofors. And the number of times it was collusively killed, did that do any credit to the reputation of our investigative agency? The government had to face an embarrassment during UPA 1 in the oil coupons case, the Volcker case as they used to call it. Brick by brick, all this was eroding the credibility of the government. You've had not one but two cases in India. People may get out on technicalities, but you've had two cases in India where there is a general conviction in the country that governments have won a parliamentary majority in a vote of confidence through means which are highly questionable. And therefore, that's a challenge and a question which is thrown up before the world's largest democracy. The 2G scam was not a small scam. At what level were people involved in this decision making? These are all questions. The matter is in court. We've debated it repeatedly. I won't refer to it. For 3 years, if we don't take action in 2G, we can be rest assured that you may think that you have put the lid on it, but you can't put a lid on public anger. That's a harsh reality. 2 weeks ago, we discussed what happened in the Commonwealth Games. Whether it's the Auditor General or it's the media or other exposés which are coming out, one by one they keep telling us how various kinds of improprieties and foul plays have taken place. Let us, sir, be assured on one fact. Ultimately, if there is fairness on the strength of which Indian democracy survives, it is not fairness in our functioning or political stands that we take. At the end of the day, public opinion in this country is extremely fierce and extremely fair. That is why during elections, governments get voted in, the governments get voted out. Waves do take place in elections because of the sense of fairness of the people. And it is this sense of fairness, the enormity of their protest is proportionate to the anger. And that anger is proportionate to the extent of malpractices which have gone on. So when people find scam after scam, and then people realize here is a government headed by a man whom we trusted, and trusted for good reason because of a good track record. And you find the government and the Prime Minister feeling completely helpless in checking this. Can we blame the people for exhibiting their anger during this situation, sir? And let us, sir, look at the manner in which we handled this whole crisis. It is true that for the last 42 years, the political system has been debating what should be the kind of Lokpal. When the first protest took place, we should have had squarely a political approach, spoken to them that we need a bill. We'll get the entire political cross-section together, which will tell them how much is doable and possible, and how much within the framework of our law and constitution is not possible. First, you lead them up the garden path, and then suddenly you decide to dump them. It creates a crisis of confidence with them. They don't trust you anymore. Sir, according to me, when you the government decided to dump the activists of India against corruption, and the ministers came out with a ministerial draft. When the ministers came out with their draft, the ministerial draft, if it had some semblance of reasonableness, which was politically marketable to the rest of the society, that people would think the government has come out with an honest bill, maybe it still doesn't meet our expectations, but we can accept it. Let's try, make a good beginning. Even that day when the ministers came out with a draft, sir, we told them, in fact, I put it with my own name, that this is a suggestion on the net. There are some things which are doable. The power to appoint a Lokpal. The power to appoint a Lokpal, there must be a systematic mechanism. It must be reasonably free from government. Don't overload it with government representatives so that it becomes a Sarkari Lokpal. Have some element of government representation will be there. You can have an opposition representation. You can have some eminent citizens put in there through a mechanism so that the best in the society are members of the Lokpal. But by a play of joints, you always wanted government to have a 60%, 70% majority or a decisive say in the appointment of Lokpal. So you almost lost the moral battle against India, against corruption, because you wanted a Lokpal where you could, in the first instance, somehow play around with the appointments. And this had come out immediately in the backdrop of the CVC's appointment, which could not take place. When it was brought to your notice that the CVC should not be appointed, a particular gentleman, because there was a taint of a pendency of a criminal case, you said, no, we are appointing him. In that background, you again load the appointing committee with people overloaded with government. You then came up with a suggestion. There's a debate, Prime Minister should be included, not included. no, the Prime Minister won't be included, we'll include him after he ceases to be a Prime Minister. But then a logical question which people are asking is, if prima facie a Prime Minister at a given point is questionable and corrupt, he should be allowed to complete his term and be made accountable only afterwards. The world's largest democracy must then suffer a corrupt Prime Minister. He must be checked there and then. He must not be allowed to be in office even for a single day if there is a serious stigma on him. But you came out with this formulation. A more reasonable formulation, I'm not saying this was the NDA's formulation, it was the NDA government's formulation, which was cleared by a standing committee headed by Mr. Pranab Mukherjee. And that formulation was, the Prime Minister will be included, some functions which impinge on national security, public order, those would be outside the sphere. And any reasonable activist that I have spoken to in the civil society says, well, to that exclusion in the interest of national security or intelligence activities where agencies report to the Prime Minister, you can keep them out. But in the matters of commercial contracts or any other form of dubious conduct, a Prime Minister at a given point of time should be included. Judiciary. What you are now willing to concede is what we have been saying from day one. Judiciary can't be covered by this Lokpal. Judiciary should be covered by a Lokpal, by another alternative mechanism. We called it the National Judicial Commission. Some people say they want to strengthen the Judicial Accountability Bill. I don't know what shape it will eventually take. But these are all areas on which, just 5 more minutes, sir.
We will have lunch after the Honorable LOP concludes.
Now I find there is a difficulty. Grievance mechanism, whether it should be in Lokpal or it should be in a separate bill. The Bihar government has come out with this legislation. Madhya Pradesh has come out with this legislation. They are working out the mannerism of starting this mechanism. Various other state governments, Mr. Mishra tells me UP has come out. If these
government service delivery system.
If it's the government service delivery system that you must address the grievances of the common man, whether you have an alternative mechanism or you have the Lokpal covering it, it could be a matter of debate. An alternative
mechanism there in Gujarat, but Lokpal not appointed for the last 7 years.
Yes.
Because of you, because of Congress.
No, please. No, please. Please. No, that you can speak when you speak. When you Chetapal, please. When you want to speak, you can speak.
What is the reason?
आप समझिए. Please.
How they are violating, the governors are violating.
Please.
Sir, this is being raised again. I didn't want to join it, but let somebody in the government, two very senior ministers are present in the first row, seriously examine it and make a case study. And you'll reach a conclusion.
Please. What is this?
You'll reach a conclusion.
आप जब बोलेंगे
You'll reach a
बैठे क्यों
conclusion
बोलते हैं?
why offices like governors should be kept away from the appointment of Lokpal. You find efforts being made to appoint a Lokpal without involving an elected government. We don't even want that situation to come. So let Mr. Krishna is there, Mr. Kavalnath is here, let them examine it rather than any side comment on this. No state government in this country will accept the governor making an appointment and saying the elected government is not to be involved. If that were to happen, then federal structure in India would seriously get impinged. So let's honestly introspect the facts of that trade. Sir,
Please.
Sir, most of the other issues that I have found, selection panel to be, these are all issues which are doable. Now you have put one provision you have put in the government's draft, that if a Lokpal is to be removed, he could be a former judge, he could be a very eminent person, only the government can initiate removal. And pending removal, only a government can suspend him. So there is an inquiry against your minister, a Lokpal is conducting, you find a member inconvenient, you can put him under suspension. Now it should either be through an impeachment process or a Supreme Court removal process. It must be independent of the political executive. What is wrong in that? Is that an issue on which you enter into a confrontation with the civil society activists? The suggestion being made is eminently reasonable. One suggestion, have a bench to deal with corruption cases expeditiously in every court. All of us should immediately agree to this. Increase the number of whistleblowers who complain to a Lokpal must get protection. Now, these are not areas where there should actually be two views even between political parties. A whistleblower in any system must get a protection. One of the grievances they have, and please consider this, and there must be some internal audit in the government as to how these provisions came in. If a man files a complaint to a Lokpal and the official is held guilty, he can be sentenced for a minimum of 6 months, maximum of 10 years. So the corrupt officer will get 6 months. Now, if your complaint turns out to be false, the complainant goes in for a minimum of 2 years imprisonment, go up to 5 years. So the punishment for filing a complaint which turns out to be incorrect is more than the punishment to be inflicted on the official held guilty. So do you seriously expect anybody in this house or outside the civil society to accept these kind of provisions? Therefore, sir, these are areas where you can, the government, now you must never legislate in haste, and at least never legislate in anger. There is one provision, because you had a problem with some civil society activists whom you first tried to bring in for a dialogue and then asked them to broke off with them. So the minister's draft, which has been introduced, has a provision: all non-government organizations will be covered by Lokpal. So they said if it receives government funding, it should be covered by Lokpal. Now what is the effect? Somebody is running a school, somebody is running a temple committee, somebody is running a gurdwara, somebody is running an orphanage. They don't take government funds. You make the government intrusive, and every NGO, now this was only as a teaser to them, that ministers decided to act in anger and provide for a bill that every NGO in this country will be now accountable to a Lokpal. Now you may not like those NGOs, I may not like some of them, but you can't have a provision where somebody has nothing to do with government. Then why leave it to Lokpal? Then say Lokpal will also investigate political parties. Therefore, the government bill requires a serious relook. And if there are areas where you or us, we don't agree with some of their provisions, and I think some of them can be made compatible, that they must exist in accordance with constitutional provisions. This bill can't have a provision which violates the Constitution. Therefore, all provisions, whether in your draft or any other draft by any of the NGOs which is there, must be constitutionally compatible. Now, if you sit with an open mind, and rather than break the dialogue and then don't talk again at all, resort to these tactics, democracy functions on some basic principles. That's what we said last week when the Prime Minister made a statement. The ultimate power is with authorities of the government to introduce the law. The authority is with Parliament to approve the law. They have a right to protest and crusade. But then we must neither curtail their right to protest, nor must we get so angry with them and say, like children, we will not speak to you now. And it's only when pressure becomes unbearable that we will start speaking to you. Most of these provisions are such that they are workable, or at least they can be brought within the dialogue domain and a solution can be worked out, rather than create a situation in the society that it appears that there is a confrontation going on between the political system of this country and the civil society. If, sir, our objectives are honorable and our objectives are common, which is how do we now at least seize the challenge and eradicate corruption in this country, if we sit with an open mind, I have not the least doubt that most of these issues can be resolved, and it won't take too much time for it to be resolved. And ultimately, if in some issue the resolution doesn't take place, the will of Parliament will prevail. And Parliament surely has got the message loud and clear that we'll be reasonable. Our principal object will be how to eradicate corruption rather than cover up corruption. If we sit with that mind, I am sure we'll respond to that challenge, which the society is now posing before the Parliament itself. I am sure, sir, that we will respond to this challenge adequately and rise to this opportunity which the society really has provided us in terms of a protest. We will use this as an opportunity. Thank you very much, sir.